Music is all we got. So we might as well give it all we got. Music is all we got. Music is all we got. We know we got it. 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 Music's all we got. Play it from the top, Mustaine. Let me get a track just to make sure I'm... Yeah. Turn me up a little bit more. Yeah. 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 Baby, keep on turning me up. Yeah, baby, keep on turning me up. Yeah. He's just the man. So many things you do that keeps on turning me up. Yeah. Keep doing that thing you're doing to me. That sweet little thing you're doing to me, baby. It's just the man. So many things you do that keeps on turning me up. Yeah. Sometimes it makes me want to say, baby, keep on turning me on. Yeah. Baby, keep on turning me on.
If everyone could take their seats, the program will begin in a couple minutes. Thank you very much.
Good evening. If everyone could please take their seats, we would really appreciate it. There's a few people in the lobby. You can migrate down. Thank you. Thank you so much for coming this evening to hashtag DAforPHL, the only millennial-focused town hall during this very, very important race for district attorney. It's hosted by PhillyCAM. I am one of the co-founders of PhillyCAM, and it's hosted in partnership with a number of other millennial organizations who we're very grateful for, including Millennials in Action and PhillyCAM. PhillyCAM was started in 2015 to support and galvanize the millennial population to get involved in the local political process, specifically in local politics and in state politics. Millennials are the largest registered voting bloc in Philadelphia. However, millennials, which is the group ages 18 to 35, we vote the least. PhillyCAM was founded to change that. If you'd like to learn more about PhillyCAM, you can head to PhillyCAM.com. You can follow the conversation this evening on social media by using hashtag DAforPHL. And just one final note, we are hosting a happy hour or a cocktail hour after this event at Fox and the Hound, courtesy of the Young Lawyers Division of the Philadelphia Bar Association. If you'd like to attend, you are most welcomed.
Hi, my name is Megan Claiborne, and I am on the board of PhillyCAM. I'm just going to give you a very brief background as to what the district attorney does. The Philadelphia District Attorney's Office is the largest prosecutor's office in Pennsylvania, and in fact, it is one of the largest district attorney's offices in the nation. It serves over 1.5 million residents in Philadelphia County, and is responsible for overseeing 600 lawyers, detectives, and support staff. Generally speaking, the district attorney's functions is to prosecute crimes in Philadelphia County. This includes deciding what cases to prosecute and how to prosecute them. For example, what charges are going to be filed, what bail to request, how to prosecute the case, and under what terms to be willing to resolve the case. The district attorney is the public face for the entire office. The district attorney guides the overall policy enforced by the office. For instance, how is the district attorney going to prosecute different offenses, and what offenses will they focus on? Will it be drug-related offenses, gun violence, political corruption? They decide whether or not to encourage diversionary programs for first-time offenders and for nonviolent drug crimes. They decide whether or not to charge a juvenile as an adult or not. And they decide when to oppose expungement and sealing of criminal records. And the district attorney's role also extends past the courtroom. For instance, they decide whether or not to require monetary bail, which can have huge implications for individuals, the communities, and jails and taxpayers that are required to support pretrial detainees. They also may choose whether or not to work closely with schools and communities to create programs to educate the public about the justice system, consequences for delinquent and criminal behavior, and the impact of crime on victims and the fiscal impact of crimes. The district attorney is a critical piece of Philadelphia's judicial system and civic community. In an off-year election, turnout can be extremely low, especially among millennial voters. So we are extremely excited to have all of you here, and we look forward to learning a little bit more about our candidates.
And if we haven't mentioned already, which I don't think we have, all proceeds from this event are going to community legal services, which supports a number of low-income Philadelphia families. Thank you.
So we're now ready to get our event underway. We ask that the audience refrain from applauding during the program, so we have maximum amount of time for questions. The program will begin with 2-minute opening statements by each of the candidates. We then have, and hopefully we'll get to them all, 15 questions submitted by Philadelphia millennials to put to these candidates and hear their answers. So without further ado, our first opening statement, Judge Deni.
Hello, I am Judge Teresa, Carr, Deni. I thought some of you might want to know how did I end up on this stage. So I'm going to go back to when I was in my 30s and graduated from law school. I tell you that because I consider myself a late bloomer. Before I went to law school, I was active in the women's movement. We did all kinds of demonstrations, all kinds of yelling at people who we didn't agree with, and did a lot of analysis of current events. I was focused very much on international affairs at that time and what was going on with women around the world. When I did go to law school, I encountered Professor Michael Libanati, who taught a case called local government law, and that's what changed my entire perspective from looking at the world internationally to focusing in on what was going on around me and how could I get involved. One of the primary conclusions that I made at the end of my time of being active in the women's movement was that the integrity of the system depends on the integrity of the people that are involved with it. And with that in mind, I became interested in the local government and got involved with the Democratic Party. I became the attorney for the Democratic City Committee and got to know a lot of the ward leaders. I know they get a bad rap, but they're actually community representatives. They don't all have university degrees, but they're very interested in local government. I defend that system. I think it works. I think many of you should get involved as committee people. I've only got 15 seconds left, so that's how I got to this stage today. Thank you.
Well, I appreciate the timekeeper because he has a very bright sign, so that allows me to know when it's time to shut up. I was born and raised in the Bedford-Stuyvesant section of Brooklyn, New York, in Brevoort houses. So my legal career began in Brevoort houses, and that is that we had our first encounter, if I would submit to you that we did, it was an encounter with police officers when in fact we are stopped or we're questioned or we are frisked. So no one had to tell me about stopped and frisked. I knew about that from an early age. No one had to tell me about running away from a police officer or from law enforcement and if they caught you, hitting you in your head, because I know about that as well. So my experience started back then. For 30 years, I've been working, approximately 30 years, working in the criminal justice system. For the first 5, I was an assistant district attorney. And then for 2 decades plus, I did defense work. And then the last 7 months, I was the first assistant in the district attorney's office, actually managing and running from August until the time I stepped out to run for this office. So what I understand is that there are things that need to be done in the system. I learned that from inside and also outside the system. But it's going to take common sense approach. It's not going to take a strong right approach or all the way left approach, but it's going to take a balanced approach. People want to feel safe. They want to feel protected, but they also want justice. They want people to answer for things that they did that was incorrect, even if it's law enforcement and they did something incorrect. They want to be able to trust their law enforcement. They want transparency. But that only occur not from the district attorney alone, but by working with the community. It's backwards, so I don't know how much time I have. 30. So when you work in that particular environment, you work along with people, you're able to solve mass incarceration. When you work along with people, you're able to deal with non-cash bail. When you work along with people, you're able to focus on what is the real crime, that is violent crime in the neighborhood, and deal with the crime that is not as bad, those that in which you need to deal with diversionary programs. I'm going to talk a lot more about that when the question is deemed necessary, but I have 15 seconds, and now it's time for me to stop.
My name is Beth Grossman, and I am the lone Republican candidate, so I'm happy to be here. And thank you to Philly Set Go. I think you are our political future, so you should commend yourself. I thank you all for being here. In 2013, I switched parties and joined the Republican Party because there began to be the beginning of a lot of Democratic public official corruption. And since then, we've had a amount of judges, a large amount of state reps, a United States congressman, an attorney general, and now our own Philadelphia district attorney who have been indicted or prosecuted or pleaded guilty or convicted of public official crimes. It is time for more political balance in this city. There has been a one-party control of the city for almost 65 years, and that leads to complacency and corruption, and it is time to bring back a healthy political balance. That being said, I'm extremely proud of my 21 and a half years in the district attorney's office. I prosecuted drug crimes, child abuse cases, political corruption, police officers, and for 8 years I was chief of the Public Nuisance Task Force Unit, where we worked with communities all throughout the city council folks, to deal with public nuisances, including drug houses, drug businesses, nuisance bars, brothels, speakeasies, anything that affects the quality of life of neighborhoods and can have a negative impact on public safety. I'm extremely proud of this because it allows people to understand. I'm not sure, it's backwards again. Sorry, love. Do I still got time? Thank you, 30 seconds. And I'm very proud because it allows people in the community to also see the district attorney's office as a resource, not just a body that prosecutes individuals. I think a lot of changes and improvements can be made in the DA's office, and it is appropriate to work with all stakeholders and members within the criminal justice system to do so. Thank you.
Hi. I'm Joe Kahn, number 54, in the Democratic primary. I am a lifelong Democrat. I'm also a lifelong Philadelphian, and I have dedicated my entire career to seeking justice in Philadelphia. And I'm running for district attorney because I want this city, the city that I love, the city where I spent my whole life and where I'm raising my 2 children, to be a city that has a progressive prosecutor, that has a progressive vision of justice for all people in Philadelphia, and the prosecutorial experience to make that a reality. The values that I have are values that I was raised with an amazing family that starts with my mom, who was from Philadelphia, who lost her father to addiction at a really early age. So as soon as she graduated high school, she became a nurse, and at an early age, while working at Einstein Hospital, met my dad, who is a tall, dark, and handsome stranger from a place called Pakistan that she'd never heard of. And they fell in love and got married, and when they decided to settle down and form a family, they learned that in the 1970s and 80s in Philadelphia, if you have a Muslim dad and a Catholic mom, the only place you should live is a Jewish neighborhood. And so that's how I came to be raised in Northeast Philadelphia, where I went to amazing public schools and was able to get an amazing education and eventually go to get my law degree at the University of Chicago, where I met another person who changed my life in terms of understanding what it meant to truly carry out the mission of public service. And that was another son of a Muslim immigrant named Barack Obama, who allowed me to learn from him both in the classroom and on the campaign trail, and allowed me to return to Philadelphia with a sense of mission. So that when I got my dream job, which was working in the DA's office at 24 years old, I was able to dedicate my career to advocating for the most vulnerable victims in our city, victims of child abuse, of sexual assault, and domestic violence. I learned a lot. One thing I learned, besides how to exonerate the innocent and take dangerous people off the street, was how to take on tough fights. The next 10 years at the U.S. Attorney's Office, I learned how to take on big fights, how to go after gun violence, human trafficking, fraud against the elderly, and corruption. And we don't have a district attorney's office right now that takes on tough and big fights. We need that, and that's why I want to be your DA.
Good evening. My name is Larry Krasner. I'm running for district attorney, and I'm a little bit different than the other candidates here, and I say that respectfully because a lot of the people up here I really respect and admire. I am a career civil rights attorney. I'm a career criminal defense attorney. I have not worked in the district attorney's office. I have not worked in government. I have been going the same direction for 30 years as an outsider, and that is in the direction of fundamental, profound change, which is what we need in a country where there are 7 times as many people in jail now as there were.
No, that can't be right. Can't be right.
Anyway, there are 7 times as many people in jail now as there were in the 1970s, where there are more, a country where there are more people in custody than in any country in the world. We are also looking at a system where $1 billion have been spent on a death penalty that is never actually imposed since the 1970s, while our public schools are closing, falling apart, where you have class sizes that are 35 instead of the 22 that I experienced when I was a kid growing up in public school. And yes, like many people here, You know, I've had my moments. The paycheck in high school was a Social Security disability check. Yes, food stamps. I know I look like a Republican, but that's actually where I come from. So I am here to suggest to you that we don't need to shift this car from fourth to third. We need to stop this car and shift in reverse. We need to have profound, fundamental, and serious change in the district attorney's office, and there is no one better to do that than someone who has not been part of this culture. There's no one better to change the culture than someone who can come in from the outside, after the public schools, after the University of Chicago, after Stanford Law School, after 5 years as a public defender, after 25 years of defending free speech. There's no one better for this particular task at this time than the outsider.
Great. My name is Rich Negrin, and I'm running for district attorney. I am number 53, number 1 in the DA slot of the ballot. You know, a lot of great people up here. You can tell all of us are a culmination of our personal experiences, our professional experiences. We live in precarious times. We have crazy things happening in the White House. We have an attorney general who's looking to reduce the oversight that the justice system has on local police and on local prosecutors. It is a scary time. We have a local DA's office in crisis. We need experienced leadership and management to make sure we go in there and someone who is ready to lead today, to start to do the kind of reforms, start to restore the integrity that we're talking about, to start to have the credibility in our communities and our neighborhoods that I think I bring. In many ways, folks, this is not politics for me. Many of you know my story. This is personal. This journey began for me when I was 13 years old, and I lost my father to a terrible homicide. He was gunned down with a MAC-10 machine gun in front of me when I was 13 years old. I held him in my arms as he died. 5 years later, I testified in federal court against the terrorist group that killed my dad. The New York Times called it the most compelling testimony during the entire month-long trial in the Southern District of New York. We convicted that individual and obtained justice for my family. It was a sense of community that helped me get through that issue. We need to do the same thing. That doesn't make me unique. I'm out there every single day talking to our young people, and they are touched by gun violence across our city and all our neighborhoods. In many of our neighborhoods, it's easier for our young people to get a gun than it is for them to find a great after-school program or to get online. I've been driving and managing, and it is my mission in life to improve the lives for our young people in Philadelphia, to bring innovation and change and culture change in a significant management job on behalf of the DA's office. I will do the same thing that I've done for the DA's office. Thank you so much.
Thank you all very much for having me. You are one of, if not the most important groups in this election and in this city. You are the group that came back into neighborhoods that people used to only say negative things about and invested and made those neighborhoods the cool places to live now and the best real estate markets. You are the people who came up with creative ways to start businesses in neighborhoods where people didn't think you could have successful businesses. In the district attorney's office, we, the millennials, are the people who turned the corner and started to make amazing reforms and started to do things that have changed the way this city addresses its criminal justice epidemic. We are the people, the millennials, in the district attorney's office who started to implement the MacArthur Grant and started to implement programs like the SAM program to decriminalize marijuana. We started the programs like AMP and AMP2, which started to take people who were arrested for dangerous narcotics and offer them jobs and drug treatment and mental health treatment rather than jail. It was us, friends of mine, who started with me and me myself, who started to take the human trafficking epidemic that we have in Philadelphia and take the people who were arrested and treat them like human beings and victims of sexual assault, which is what they are, rather than defendants. It was the millennials in the DA's office who implemented, along with me, who started the program, the Focused Deterrence Program, which reduced gun violence and homicide in this city dramatically, more than any program that's ever been implemented in Philadelphia before. We are the answer to the question, how do we make Philadelphia the city that we all know it can be? And with your help, I will be the millennial candidate and the only millennial candidate who becomes the next district attorney and who continues the important reforms that will fix this city. Thank you very much.
Michael Untermeyer, Democratic candidate for district attorney. For too long now, the district attorney's office hasn't been listening to us. In pursuit of statistics, they spend their time going after the wrong people. We should be spending our time going after the dangerous criminals and their organizations that are hurting our community. We need a district attorney that's committed to reforming this office and to being a true advocate for fairness for every Philadelphian. We need big change. We need to take on the big guys. I've been taking on the big guys most of my life. After law school, I went into the district attorney's office where I was one of 3 lawyers assigned to start the domestic violence unit. We fought to protect the safety and for justice for victims of family violence. After the district attorney's office, I went into the attorney general's office where I spent 11 years investigating and prosecuting major drug dealers and their organizations. I became an expert on white-collar crime, money laundering, and financial crimes. After the Attorney General's office, I started my own practice helping small businesses. When the mortgage foreclosure crisis hit, I volunteered as a temporary judge to help people stay in their homes and to take on the big banks. I've been taking on the big guys for a long time now. I'm running for district attorney because I have the best ideas, experience, and integrity to reform this office and truly have it be an advocate for fairness to every Philadelphian and to improve the lives of every Philadelphian.
Thank you very much for the opening statements, and it really helped kind of frame the discussion we're going to have this evening. Now it's on to the mainstay of our program, which is the questions from millennials. And our first question comes from our very own board member, Megan Claiborne.
Good evening. Pennsylvania recently passed Act 5 to allow the sealing of certain criminal convictions. Those seeking to expunge, redact, and seal their records still face a great deal of pushback from the district attorney's office. As the district attorney, what will be your policy on these potentially life-altering mechanisms?
And I should have mentioned at the beginning, Judge Deni, this question's for you.
I'm glad to get that question because I have a strong position on it. I think we need to have a clean slate bill for juveniles, and I think we need to be able to seal the records of people who are not involved in crimes once their sentences completed plus 2 years, because to get a felony conviction in Philadelphia is to get an economic death penalty. You cannot get a job, and it's a totally unfair system that disenfranchises more and more people to the point where the majority of people well, of course, in the world I see, are disenfranchised and unable to get work. If you can't get work, you can't have a family. You can't build the community. You're scraping around just trying to get by. So this is something I feel very strongly about. I think we have to lobby in Harrisburg, and we need laws that prevent these corporations from refusing to hire people who have especially older convictions. And you can't keep people unemployed during their major employment years, which is your age, basically. You've got your education, you've got your energy, you've got your health. You want to use it, and you can't because you made a mistake when you were younger. But you're not the only people I'm concerned about. There's plenty of other people in this boat, too. So it's something that definitely has to change, if not nationwide, at least in Philadelphia.
Thank you very much. And just for the benefit of the audience, every other member of the panel will now have an opportunity to answer that question as well, beginning with Tariq and moving down.
And that's 1 minute, is that correct?
A minute 30.
Minute 30. Okay, let me begin by saying this. There are 3 Ds in answer to the question. The question was a good question because it indicates what would you do in the office to actually assist in expungements or sealings. Well, the first D has to be diversion. Diversion programs are there. They weren't begun just by millennials, but they were begun there. And we have to enter what is called a pre-diversion program. What is a pre-diversion program? It's a pre-arrest program. As opposed to expunging, why don't we prevent from giving them a record altogether? For example, if you have somebody at petty crime or drug offense, you put them in a pre-arrest program. There's no arrest, there's no fingerprinting, there's no record of it at all. If they complete what they need to complete during the course of that time, then in fact, you don't arrest them at all. They go along with their merry way. The difference between that is you don't have to worry about expungement or anyone peeking and seeing whether or not they had a conviction. The other is called diversity. In order to make those type of calls, those calls that are discretionary calls, you have to have people that have an understanding of the people that they're looking at, the circumstances in which they're examining, and individual circumstances of the person that is arrested. Why is that important? It's important because sometimes somebody can have a bad day. And because someone has a bad day, they shouldn't carry a record for the rest of their life. You may have something going on in their background that is an illness that's the root of a problem that needs to be treated as opposed to an arrest or a conviction. So a pre-arrest or a diversion program or diversity allows you to have that. Then you have to also have someone with discretion. Discretion, again, comes with common sense. It comes with good common sense. And it comes from having an understanding other than just prosecuting cases, other than just trying cases, but knowing which cases to try.
Firmly in support of this act. Nobody walks without sin, none of us. And I agree, people can make mistakes all the time, but I think it would be much more effective to have an individual have his or her record expunged or sealed so they can seek employment, because when somebody becomes a productive citizen, it's common sense and statistics tell us there is less chance of recidivism. I'm also in support of pre-arrest programs and diversionary programs, because people could be tagged, they could get services, they could do some type of restorative justice kind of community service, which takes them back to the community. They kind of face the community of things that they've done wrong, and they could fix it, and they go on their merry way. But I think it's a fair act, it's important. And there have been wonderful people who have volunteered attorneys pro bono to do these expungements one at a time. And there are so many, and it takes an enormous amount of resources. So allowing the expungements to be done in a broader scope, maybe after a certain time, I think that makes great good sense and also conserves judicial and attorney resources in a common sense manner.
Thank you. So, Megan, thank you for your question. This is a really important topic, and let me begin by saying, absolutely, I support legislative efforts which are needed to expand the opportunities for expungements. But let me step back and talk about what I have done as a prosecutor, because it was important for me to be the kind of prosecutor that I think all prosecutors should be. So when there were people that had the opportunities to get expungements, I wasn't a person who fought with them, but I would work with defendants and defense attorneys to try and get their records expunged whenever possible. And I think that's one of the things that we have to do is recognize that for all those cases where I had that opportunity, there were plenty of people that had records that didn't realize this was an option. And I think that we have to go beyond doing what's permissible or what's allowable, but be proactive. And as district attorney, what I plan to do is, with whatever expungement opportunities the law allows, is I want to make sure we're conducting clinics, community-based opportunities for people to get educated about the possibility of having some of these records expunged. And Tariq is exactly right. We have to go beyond just the cases where there are convictions, but expand opportunities for diversion. It's why I've called for an end to the prosecution of the lowest level drug offenses, period. Because we have to start treating those cases like public health issues, not criminal justice issues. And the final thing I'll say, and we'll have to hopefully talk about this more later, is the need to go even further back, which is to deal with the opportunities of juvenile justice to treat more and more young offenders. We need legislative fixes to deal with that. We can talk about that later. But the more cases we keep in the juvenile system, the easier it is to expunge and seal records for young people.
Okay. So the chair of my campaign is a man named Mike Lee. Excuse me. Mr. Lee and Ryan Hancock, along with CLS, have probably done more to further this discussion than anyone else in the state in the past 7 years. Right out of Drexel Law School, the two of them founded an organization called PULSE, Philadelphia Lawyers for Social Equity, and soon thereafter, in conjunction with CLS, all kinds of legislative and other efforts were made that have been very progressive and very helpful to make expungement more doable. They're both on my campaign for a reason, which is that this is an issue that is not just today's issue. It's a reflection of the last 50 years of an unfair, inequitable system that has been both racist and has also been classist in how it dealt with people. What we need is a district attorney who understands the ins and outs. For example, right now, your first court date for expungement is September, and I checked that this morning. It doesn't have to be. There's all kinds of things that can be done administratively right now to expedite these court dates. There's no reason why this DA's office should be objecting to expungement for acquittals, where there is a legal absolute entitlement to it. We really need to have a district attorney who, yes, is going to be helpful on the legislative front moving forward, but more importantly, knows how to run that office and knows how to run the specifics. So it's not difficult and it's not daunting to get these expungements. Final point, what no one's mentioned here is that the DA's office retains a file of information on all these cases even after expungement. So for them to object to dismissals because a case is serious really makes no sense when that information will be there to the limited extent it is needed in the future.
So I agree with almost everybody, I think, around we need to expunge cases to the full extent of the law and not to object to them. You don't have to believe me when I say that. If you look at my communications, my community plan that I rolled out 2 weeks ago on my website, doing expungement clinics is part of what I'm going to expect our young ADAs to do. It's an incredibly important part of moving on to where we need to go as a city, all of us combined, to give people second chances. But here's the thing. It's not just about expungements. It's about jobs. It's about opportunities. In the private sector, I hired former offenders. We put them all, literally as many as we could throughout Aramark, throughout the stadiums, throughout locations and businesses, teaching them how to become chefs, teaching them how to be food safety certified. As managing director, I implemented something called Ban the Box, because for many years, that same old city form for 30, 40 years they'd have to check the box that they had a prior conviction, and they would get screened and wouldn't get that second interview and wouldn't get hired. And that's horribly unfair for the city of Philadelphia not to give people an opportunity and not to set the example for private enterprise across the city so that we can give people an opportunity so that in Philadelphia we have no throwaway citizens. I did that during my role. But here's something I'm incredibly proud of. I hired former offenders directly into my office, even though some folks told me not to do that. My former chief of staff had something many years ago, and I was told, don't hire that person, and I did anyway and gave him an opportunity. He was the right guy for the job. He did a phenomenal job. I'm going to do the same thing as district attorney. We're going to hire former offenders into our citizen engagement unit to reach out to our kids and make a difference.
The number one determining factor in countless studies as to whether or not a person gets convicted of a crime is whether or not they have a job. And the number one determining factor in whether or not they're able to get a job is whether or not they have a criminal conviction. And right now in Philadelphia, we have 40,000 people on probation and parole. And we have even more people who have criminal convictions who did so well in their probation and parole that it's done, but they still have that hanging over their head. In fact, a lot of people don't know this, but if you admit to, in other words, are found guilty of a juvenile offense that's a felony, that conviction will stay with you for the rest of your life. So what I'm saying is that I absolutely advocate for and promote and am in support of a program that says that we will get rid of these convictions that prevent people from getting jobs. We will also agree to get people off of probation who have done well on probation and parole for an extensive period of time. And what that will do is dramatically change the number of people in Philadelphia who are able to get jobs, and it will dramatically change the number of people who are arrested for low-level, nonviolent crimes.
The problem with our district attorney's office is it has not been an advocate for reform. First of all, I'm supportive of any legislation that will make the clearing of records easier and the sealing of records easier for individuals. We've all kind of said the same thing, that with a record, you can't get a job. The district attorney has a role, and that role should be, again, to help people get their records cleaned up. They should have an opportunity to go back in the community, an opportunity to work. We also have to deal with, again, pre-diversion programs. The best program I've seen for drug offenders is in Seattle, Washington, where people are picked up and they're given a choice of going into the criminal justice system, or they can go right into a program where they're taken to a place and they're assigned a social worker and they're given help with their drug problem, with housing, with getting a job. And if they stay in the program, they don't end up in the system at all.
Thank you very much. Our next question is from Matthew Schaefer, and we'll begin with Tariq.
Good evening, and thank you all for being here tonight. My question: overcrowding in jails and prisons have long been an issue. Philadelphia has made some significant progress in this area, with about a 20% decline in the past 2 years in its jail population. What would you do to encourage this progress, including any pretrial reforms?
Why don't I start with what I've done? For the 8 months that I worked, and I would submit to you for about 1.5 years, I've worked with the Criminal Justice Reform Committee. It was a committee that was put together, city councilmen and different stakeholders, by the President Councilman Darrell Clark. We began to work on that non-cash bail for low-level drug offenders that everybody is talking about on their campaign. We already began to do that. We investigated it. We looked at it. In fact, we went to Washington, D.C. to look at their program. And it is through our suggestion in the MacArthur grant that we began to work on that. Let's talk about that. We also began to work on, not what I'm talking about, what I've done. We began to work on what is called day reporting centers, realizing that some low-level offenses come from a root problem, as I indicated earlier in another answer. That is drugs, alcohol, underemployment, non-employment, homelessness, mental health. Well, if you deal with the root problem, you won't have recidivism. If you deal with the root problem, you won't have an arrest. If you deal with the root problem, you can eliminate it and have that person be a productive member of society. So you deal with overcrowding by catching it at the beginning end. That is, don't put people in pretrial and don't put people in that don't deserve to be there. Then you have to examine why there are people in jail that shouldn't be in jail, why there are people in jail that should be in jail but too long, and why, in fact, there are people that should be in jail and we should leave them in there. In order to do that, again, it has to be on diversity. Diversity has to be a major key in making any decision you have. The most important component that a district attorney has, an assistant district attorney has, a chief or a deputy has, is their ability to use their discretion. There is a lot of discretion that hasn't been used. I know it hasn't been used. It wasn't used until I got into that office. And I submit to you, for the 8 months I was there, if you look at them and look at the work, not what someone is saying about it, but the work, you see that it was done. These diversion programs that people have mentioned on this stage have already been in place. They haven't been done correctly. And I submit to you, Tariq El-Shabazz, 56 on that program, but number 1 in your heart, will do it.
And I think the diversion programs and day reporting things are an absolute positive thing that can really continue to reduce the prison population. And also with regard to discretionary things, each individual needs to be looked at as what he or she is, an individual. And that being said, we also need to evaluate, and change our thinking with regard to those who are there on a judicial detainer or probation detainer, as well as for probation violations. And are there other effective ways, instead of them crowding up the prison, to be like, all right, well, instead of keeping them there, can we have them report? Can we have them do other things? But, it also goes back to a question of prison resources as well as population, because it's costing a lot of money to keep these folks in, as well as looking at, can we come to a resolution of these cases earlier, because there's a large prison backlog, which is also keeping people in for a longer amount of time. So you have to weigh resources on all angles to figure out what to do more creatively.
Yeah, Matthew, thanks for your question. Just so we're all on the same page, when we're talking about Philadelphia's jails, we're talking about the county prisons, right? So the state prisons are outside of Philadelphia. In Philadelphia, if you're in county jail, that's typically because you're being held, right, before you've been convicted of any crime, or you're awaiting trial, right, or sentencing, or you're being sentenced at a low level, something less than 2 years, basically, right? And the fact is that we still have a broken bail system, and despite the talk from the current district attorney, we have a amoral system in which there are people who sit in jail because they're poor, not because they've been convicted of a crime. Now, in the 10 years that I was a federal prosecutor, in every single case, we asked these questions. Is this person who's coming into court before they've been convicted of anything, are they too dangerous to be let out? Are they too much of a guaranteed flight risk to be let out? And if the answer was no, then we didn't just set bail at some arbitrary number and see if they could scrap together the resources to make it. We found a way to get them out in every single case. That's the kind of standard we need in Philadelphia, and we should have that system. Beyond the issue of bail, of all the people that are sitting in those jails because they're poor, we have these low-level drug offenses we'll talk about more later. The final thing is that we do have so many people on probation that don't need to be, and what we need to do is go beyond the ability of the prosecutor's office, the district attorney's office, to punish those people when they fail. We need to do more to understand the district attorney has a responsibility in setting them up for success. We did that at the U.S. Attorney's Office with a reentry program that was dedicated to focusing on young men coming out of jail for violent offenses, making sure they didn't reoffend, because it was bad for them to go back to prison, and it was bad for the community to have them returning to violent crime. That's the kind of stuff I want to bring to Philadelphia at the DA's level.
I think this is a great question. I only wish that we had a situation that we don't have. There are 8 candidates here, so the reality is we're confined to a minute and a half through no one's fault. So I'm just going to suggest to you how you really find out the answer to this question, because I can't cover it in a minute and 30. When Decarcerate Pennsylvania was protesting, and when they were getting arrested at Graterford, they came to me for representation. And my office represented them, and so did my campaign chair, Mike Lee. And they came to me for a reason, because this isn't something I started talking about when the campaign began. This is something that I've been working on and dealing with my entire career. Not just them, but other activists and organizers who've been on this issue their entire careers. So as you evaluate what you're hearing up here, and you hear people saying, I started, or I'm gonna, let's all remember something. Words are nice. And Holly Otterbein has written a lengthy article about how my platform has been followed by a lot of other people here. I encourage you to look at it in Philadelphia Magazine. Well, it is true that my platform has shifted this conversation towards a more progressive position, and I'm proud of that. But it's going to be up to you to figure out whether all these folks who are saying these things after a career in which they have not demonstrated achievements in those areas really mean it. Because words are ultimately made of air, and it will be for you to determine whether the walk each of us has walked establishes that there's credibility on things like an intent to actually reduce mass incarceration.
I think there's broad agreement on things like bail reform and day reporting centers. I don't think those are controversial. I think they're obvious reforms. I think they're talking about those reforms all across the country. With all due respect to Larry, Larry's great. He's smart, but he didn't invent that. That's been going on throughout the country in the United States. Brooklyn is a great example of that. They're doing these reforms all over the country, quite frankly, and we need to pay attention to those, and I'm going to do that as district attorney. I believe the two most important moments in the life of an individual who's caught up in the criminal justice system is that very first contact and that very first time that they're about to get that felony. That felony is a lifetime sentence of poverty for folks. At both of those critical moments, we need to intervene and make sure that we are treating the root causes of what's causing that crime. We know that crime is not the root cause in and of itself. There's an addiction. There's a mental health issue that's undiagnosed. There's an economic issue and an opportunity issue where we criminalize poverty that is being untreated. We need to divert and intervene at those critical moments to make a difference. My program is going to be simple. It's going to be called First Contact, First Felony. We're going to intervene in a way that helps to change people's lives. And Jack's right. You heard me say it earlier. A big part of it is technical training, getting folks jobs, getting the cooperation of our corporate community, of our nonprofits, of our city government, working together. The DA's office, folks, can't do this alone. Mass incarceration is a massive problem, but we are an incredibly important catalyst into bringing all our stakeholders together to make a difference on this issue, and I'm going to do that as district attorney.
It's a great question, and it's a lot of what I was talking about when I started in my opening statement. There are 6,500 people approximately in our county jails right now, which is down from 8,000 approximately 2 years ago. And a lot of how we got that population down was diversionary programs, the ones that I talked about, AMP1, AMP2, the small amount of marijuana program, Future Forward. These are ways that we get to people when they come into the system to make sure that we give them better offers than jail time and that we keep them out of jail and decrease the prison population. So what do we need to do next? What's the next big step? It's two parts. First of all, a lot of people are in our jails right now because they have mental health disorders, not because they're criminals. There's one district in Philadelphia right now, the 35th district, that screens for mental health disorders upon arrest. It should be every single district. And doing that would keep the population from growing, and it would also decrease it significantly. And two, and this is most important, there are, as I said before, 40,000 people on probation right now. And what that means is if they're arrested, regardless of whether or not they're guilty, they're not able to get diversion programs, and they have to sit in jail and wait for their case to be resolved. We can solve that immediately. As district attorney, what I will do is have my district attorneys look at cases like that and advocate for. In other words, tell the judge who has that person on probation or parole, we don't want them to sit waiting for their nonviolent and low-level offense to be resolved. We want them out on the street with job training, with the treatment they need. This is how we solve the problem of mass incarceration.
Kareem Chappelle. He was in jail over the holidays. His bail was set at $600. He lost his home, his car, and his job. It's simply unfair. There are over 1,000 people in the Philadelphia jails today whose bail is set at less than $1,000. Half of individuals whose bail is set at $500 or less take 3 days before they can come up with the bail money. It's simply an unacceptable system. Before I ran, I looked at the bail systems throughout the country. The best I found was in Washington, D.C. It's a bail system not based on money whatsoever. There is no money bail there. They use a point system. They look at your risk of flight from the community and your risk of danger. And if you're above a certain point score, you're kept in custody. And if you're below a certain point score, you are released conditionally. We have to change the bail system in Philadelphia so it doesn't discriminate against you based on how much money you have or don't have. Thank you.
And our next question is from George Russell.
Do I get? Do you
Oh,
want?
I
me to answer?
apologize.
Okay.
So the moderator screwed up.
All right, that's okay.
Judge Deni, thank you. I
Teresa
apologize
Carr,
again.
I ballot position number 58. Okay, I agree with most of what's been said. Some of the people we're talking about state incarceration and how to decarcerate. They were convicted under previous, I don't want to say regimes, but people who went for the maximum sentence in every single case. Now, we're moving away from that, but we're still asking for excessive sentences. Why do people need to do at least a year of reporting probation for possessing a drug? It's just all out of proportion. The penalty does not fit the crime. We're overburdening our resources with the probation department to require all this reporting, which can't get. They just can't do it. If you have a job, you've got to be taking days off at your job to do the reporting. There's a lot of things that can change. And I spoke with a social worker up at the Riverside, which is the women's county prison, the other day, and they are changing. And she told me that within the past year, the population has decreased by 25%. So we are in motion, but we can do better. We can. The thing with some of the community services and the jobs, you folks have to come up with some reasonable community services, because sometimes we send them to people who just sign off on it. They don't actually do any community service. I found this out when I was working at the SAM and other types of programs. I mean, it's got to be a real community service. It can't be, a faux program. But we don't need to have people reporting for a year for minor crimes.
So our next question is going to be from George Russell. Russell?
Hello, everyone. Since its establishment in 2014, the Conviction Review Unit has not produced any exonerations. Will you continue to use this unit, and if so, will you ensure it has the manpower and resources it needs to timely make certain that all of our convictions here in Philadelphia are high-quality convictions and that we are putting the right people, and only the right people, in our jails and prisons?
And it starts with Beth.
Absolutely. I'm in firm support of the Conviction Review Unit. I am also aware that I think we have a necessity to work together with outside groups, including the Innocence Project. I think all of us up here would sing the praises of a woman, Marissa Bluestein, who works on that, who is incredible. Perhaps outside eyes are the ones who need to look at this in some way, shape, or form. But in addition, I would like to increase the staff on that. But the other area that I would like to focus on is the heavy lifting that kind of has to be done at the front. Instead of something decades later where somebody has been incarcerated for years, I think the DA's office has an obligation to listen to defense counsel when they come to them, whether it's before the preliminary hearing or after, to say, look, I have some evidence. I need you to take a fair look at this because my guy has an alibi. And instead of waiting for trial or conviction, we are obligated as seekers of justice to take a look at that and do that. I'm currently been practicing for a short while of time of doing criminal defense, and it has certainly rounded out, my experience in a way that gives me a broader picture. And the attorney for whom I work recently had his second individual released from jail prior to trial because of evidence he found himself. This is the second time it happened. It was two were homicides, and it was with the same prosecutor. So I think things need to be done at the first and foremost before we get to somebody who has been in jail for a year. So I think you need heavy lifting on the front and, of course, on the back. So I think, it's kind of two sides of the same coin. Thank you.
George, thanks for your question. Just to step back for a second. So when this campaign began, it began when no one was willing to challenge the incumbent district attorney, Seth Williams, who at the time had the backing of the Democratic Party and many political allies. I quit my job because I couldn't stand to see 4 more years of what was going on. One of the first things that I attacked Mr. Williams for was not his personal scandals, was not his ethical issues, was his failure to have meaningful conviction review. And after months of those attacks, for me at first as the only candidate, we eventually saw that unit go from one part-time prosecutor, right? This was a unit that had one person working part-time to having a grand total of 2 attorneys, right, and a couple of detectives. Number one, yes, I support the mission. I think the unit has to be reworked. It has to be expanded so it has the resources that are necessary. I think that we have to, as Beth correctly states, we have to think broader in terms of making sure we have these problems rooted out at the beginning. And when we discover that there was an unjust conviction, we have to treat these issues. They're discussed as sentinel moments, right? We have to learn from these and understand what we can do differently next time, right? They do that in medicine. They do that in insurance, right? We need to be doing that with criminal justice to make sure that it doesn't happen again, and not be afraid to admit that a mistake was made, not be afraid of tough answers that might come out, and do what we did at the U.S. Attorney's Office. Is when we see a problem with a police officer, launch an investigation, right? Not be afraid of difficult answers that might come by asking tough questions, and that's the direction that we need to take our district attorney's office in moving forward.
You know, the unfortunate truth is that the district attorney's office and to some extent the federal prosecution have been in a culture of defend the conviction at all cost. And that's after you get the conviction at all cost. Not all of them. I don't mean to say that, but way too much. A lot of this really comes down to character. I know what that conviction integrity unit was. It was lip service. People were chosen who would not overturn convictions. That's the reality. Some of them are people I like. Some of them are people I've known 30 years, but that's the reality. It was a unit in name only. And that's why I say a lot of it comes down to character. The person who is the next district attorney has to be a person who really will care about this, who really will do something. We can all talk about how many people are going to be in the unit and all that kind of stuff. But the bottom line is it flows from whether you have a district attorney who really means it. I am sitting up here as I think, the only lawyer in the history of the city of Philadelphia who has been instrumental in overturning 800 convictions in relation to a crew of narcotics officers who went on trial down in federal court on allegations of corruption. 800. It wasn't all by me, but I was the one who blew the lid off of it in criminal court. So I have a history of this. I'm known for this. This is something I care about, and I've shown it over and over and over in my career. And once again, I encourage you, look at the record. For example, you can look at my website, which is krasner4da.com. And if you check into me, Google me, you'll get it. You'll see where I'm coming from.
So this is an incredibly important question and a huge distinction, I think, between where the office is today and where it needs to go. Brooklyn is the example around this. Ken Thompson, who, when I was on the board of the Pennsylvania Innocence Project, we honored and gave him an award before he passed away, set the standard nationally for conviction review units. We're fortunate here in Philadelphia, folks. We have the Quattrone Center at Penn, the Center for Social Justice, that actually wrote the Bible on the best practices around conviction review units. I'm going to work. I've met with John Holloway. He's a former colleague of mine at Morgan Lewis. We're going to bring in the Quattrone Center. This DA's office has actually resisted those efforts, and that helped. A leading advocate right here in one of our great academic institutions, and this office has turned its back on them and refused to work with them. We are going to set the national model for criminal justice reform and conviction review. Folks are going to stop talking about great cities like Brooklyn and San Diego and other cities and start talking about Philadelphia being the national model where we are the most, I think, the greatest, most progressive city in the country. Our institutions should reflect that. This DA's office is going to reflect that when I'm the DA.
Yeah, it's absolutely true that the Conviction Review Board was more or less something that was a good idea that was not implemented really at all. Joe's absolutely right. There's no question that you need way more attorneys than one or two to basically retry cases, some of which are very old, and figure out whether or not the person got a fair trial, whether or not the person's constitutional rights were protected. And what you also need, in addition to approximately more like 10 attorneys, is you need attorneys with differing experiences. A lifelong public defender would be a perfect person to be on that review board, to argue with those lifelong DAs and say, this is why I don't think this case is fair. This type of thing would give this unit a different perspective. And then the unit should also open itself up to the media and to the public and say, this is why we've decided what we've decided with these important cases. And it also has to have a different policy. In other words, the policy has to be, if we look back on a conviction from the 1980s, and we can't tell if the person got a fair trial, and we can't tell if the person's constitutional rights were protected or not. But what we do know is that they've been in prison, being upstanding prisoners for the last 20, 25 years, which I see some DAs in the office, right, in the room right now, and I know you, just like me, have been up to Graterford and met with those people, then those people should come home. There's no value in keeping people in jail forever for some mistake they made as a child that they've made up for in spades by doing the right thing for decades.
The problem with our district attorney's office is that it's really forgotten its mission. Our district attorney for the last whatever number of years has been focused on getting statistics and convictions. The mission of the district attorney's office should be justice. The example that all of us up here are aware of is Anthony Wright. He was convicted of a rape and a homicide that he did not commit. 22 years after he was convicted, the Pennsylvania Innocence Project came up with DNA evidence showing that he was innocent and showing who, in fact, did the crime. Instead of the district attorney's office doing the right thing, taking steps to release him, they fought him and kept him in jail for another 3.5 years. This is simply an unfair result, and it's unacceptable. We need a robust and meaningful conviction integrity unit that will look at bad convictions and fight for fairness for every Philadelphian.
Teresa, Carr, Deni, ballot number 58. The conviction review department has been a waste of time, but it's very important that it be revived and rebuilt. I remember practicing law 30-some years ago when if you wanted to represent indigents, you were getting paid $15 an hour. Going into you're representing somebody who's on trial for the death penalty, and you can't get $125 out of the courts for an investigator. Those cases need to be reinvestigated because they weren't adequately resourced. With more money at hand, some of them might not have been convicted. So it goes way back as far as what we have to take another look at. I think that these long sentences are just a waste of humanity. I don't know how many crimes. Now, there are some just totally evil people that we have to be kept locked away. But I don't know how many crimes are worth more than 20 years in prison. So I think we need to rethink some of the barbaric solutions we use to crime, to solve crime.
I think what we need to do is understand that I would, for the first time, I would say, with respect to tonight, I agree totally with Mr. Krasner with respect to what will be perfect for conviction review. Why is that? Not him, but what would be perfect. The reason why I say that is just simply this. To tell you that you need more people, you need more investigators, you need robust. All of that is lip service. The bottom line is you need courage and integrity for the person to call a spade a spade. If you have all of those individuals, if you have all of the investigators, all of the assistant DAs, but you don't have the integrity or the courage to call a spade, it doesn't make a difference. It still won't work. It starts with character, and you're absolutely right. It ends with diversity, and you're absolutely right. And see, I knew Ken from Brooklyn. I'm from Brooklyn. It wasn't somebody I read about or I gave an award to. It's someone who I talked to, and I talked to him specifically about conviction review. The conviction review unit, when I was in there, was abysmal, no doubt about it. It won't be abysmal no more because the person that would head it, the person in charge of it, has the character and integrity to make the right call. 56, one in your heart, Tariq El-Shabazz.
So for this next question, we're doing something a little different. We're going to have two questioners. And the next question deals with guns, and it is something that we received a number of questions about, both gun violence in the city and the corresponding rights of gun owners. And so here we have Drew Deegan and Jason Franks. And we'll start with Drew.
Thank you for being here this evening. How can we reduce gun deaths in Philadelphia?
And then Jason's companion question.
And then when discussing that plan, how would you make sure that my right to own a firearm to protect my life, liberty, and property is respected and protected?
This question begins with Joe.
Thank you. Gentlemen, thank you for your question. So let me begin by speaking a little bit about how we dealt with this when I was at the U.S. Attorney's Office, because it wasn't just one step, it was a series of steps. So One of the first assignments I had when I was there, this was starting around 2006, and for those first few years, what my responsibility was coordinating what was called the Violent Crime Impact Team, which was a interagency effort working with the ATF, the Philadelphia Police, Upper Darby Police, and other agencies to try and do something about the unbelievable rate of gun violence and the rate of homicides in Philadelphia. And the way that we brought that, and this, by the way, when I say we, this is scores of people throughout Philadelphia, scores of partners working on this problem together, and I was just a foot soldier in this effort. One of the things we did was we used the power of our office to deal with federal prosecutions, not to sweep up everyone that we found with a gun that was breaking the law in violation of federal law, but to be smart, to talk to the community and find out who are the people that are the most dangerous, who's most at risk to kill others or be killed. And by taking that kind of approach, we were able to be very effective, number one, at taking dangerous people out of the community to keep our families safe. Number two, though, we weren't satisfied like the current DA's office is with just getting a conviction and calling it a day. We wanted to go further, because for people who were looking at doing 15 years in jail because they had accrued all these felonies and were now caught causing mayhem with a firearm, we gave them a choice. They could do all that time, or they can try and work with us to get at the bigger problem, go after the big guys, and help deal with the gun trafficking, the straw purchasing operations, and shutting down gun shops that were turning a blind eye to getting these illegal guns on the street. So it was a comprehensive series of things we did at the beginning. I'm running out of time. At the end, we worked with these offenders who were coming out of prison and making sure that after getting them leniency if they cooperated, that we also set them up for success by helping them get jobs, by having them have mentors, and having an incentive to even get further leniency if they stayed on the right path. We invested in their success. That kept everyone safer, and it was the best way for us to go after gun violence without infringing on anyone's constitutional right to legally carry a gun.
First of all, Mr. El-Shabazz is first in my heart. I want you to know that. Second, look, I agree with a lot of what Joe is saying, but I don't think that's the bigger problem. I think that is part of the solution, but that these types of efforts to stamp out the problem have not addressed the reality that gun shops in Philadelphia are lax and they are loose. There is a group of clergy known as Heeding God's Call whose congregations have fought against improper practices by gun shops forever, and this DA's office arrested them rather than go after the gun shops, including one of the dirtiest in the history of the state, Colosimos, which was shut down after I got that clergy acquitted for protesting at the gun shop. Get it? This DA's office arrests clergy who are trying to stop gun violence. They don't shut down the gun shop. So it's a cultural thing. We have to change that. But the truth is, the big solution here is what you don't want to hear. The big solution here is that there are, let's face it, there are more guns than people. Guns last forever. And if you are going to stop 16-year-olds from wanting to pick up guns, 16-year-old young men, because it's all young men basically, if you're going to stop it, then they need to have hope. They need to have a reason not to walk out the door and hang out with the guys on the corner and become part of a gang and pick up a gun and put blood on the street. And the way they get that hope is by putting your money into public education, into drug treatment, into all the long-term solutions that we have ignored for my entire career as we built more and more and more prison cells. That is called healing society, and that is called how you actually get something done.
So this has been kind of the issue of my life, right? I'm the person up here who is a victim of gun violence. I've been on the board of Ceasefire. I think common sense gun reform makes sense. Lost and stolen, obviously. The assault weapons ban. You can still buy the MAC-10 submachine gun that killed my dad on the internet today. Watch a video and automate it and create what really is a weapon of mass destruction. All that stuff makes sense. But here's the secret sauce, folks, and I've been working on this issue my entire life. We're not going to arrest our way out of this situation. We're not going to be tougher on enforcement. And, of course, we need to arrest straw purchasers and all that stuff. Of course, we should close down the loophole and gun shops that are doing horrible things. But here's the thing. My daughter says this really well. She loves to play basketball. And she lights up whenever we talk about it. And I say, her name is Marielle. She's 11. I say, what do you love so much about it? And this is a couple years ago. And she said to me, Dad, when I'm on the court, I feel powerful. We need to give our kids not just hope, but to make them feel powerful, to let them know. That's the power of self-determination, to let them know that they're going to live beyond the age of 25, that they're going to make better choices. We're not going to arrest our way out of this situation, folks. We need all of us, our community, to stamp out violence, to give our kids opportunity, and to make sure that they make the best choices because they know they have the power of self-determination and they don't need a gun to resolve their problems and their differences. They're here to be great citizens and they have a bright future. We're a long way from that, and we need all to work together on that.
So it's a three-part answer. The first part is a program called Focused Deterrence that I started talking about a little bit in my opening. And I really want each and every one of you who care about this issue to look this issue up and look up Focused Deterrence and what it is. It's a program started by millennials in the DA's office, run by millennials in the DA's office, that decreased group-related homicides in South Philadelphia by 70%. What it does is it seeks through data gathering and through information gathering to learn who's most likely to shoot and who's most likely to be shot. And what it does is it wraps those people in opportunities and resources. It goes directly to the person on 5th Street who's likely to shoot the person on 7th Street and says, we have a better way for you. We have a job for you. We have sports for you. We have positive activities and education. And what the statistics show around the country is that this saves lives and it saves young people from being shot. And it does it in amazing numbers. It decreased homicides in Boston by 35%. So this program, which was only used in South Philadelphia, needs to be expanded to every neighborhood in Philadelphia that has a gun violence problem. The second thing is the gun shops and the gun shows that dump illegal guns into our city. I had a gun violence task force agent on the stand say he's at the same gun shop every week for an investigation. That shop now needs to be shut down. The last thing is City Hall passed legislation that was almost the same as in New York, that in New York saved tons of lives and saved tons of people from being shot. It was gun violence legislation. The DA's office didn't back it up. Under my administration, the DA's office will back up that legislation, and we will save these kids and save them from being shot and save them from being murdered.
In New York County, Robert Morgenthau was the district attorney. When he took office some 25 years ago, there were over 650 homicides a year. When he left office, there were less than 70 homicides a year. So you can see it's possible to have an impact and real change on gun violence. First, I think there has to be much more cooperation with the city and the state and the federal government. We have to pour more resources into this. Secondly, we have to have a community-based district attorney's office, which means a district attorney with the police work with the community, work with community leaders to talk with families and get guns off the street. And lastly, I think we have to be tough in terms of enforcing the gun laws. Right now, if you are a straw buyer of a gun, your first offense, it's not necessarily a mandatory minimum period of incarceration. I think if you're a straw buyer of a gun, there should be real punishment. I think if you carry an illegal gun on the streets, we should have zero tolerance for that, and there should be some real punishment. You shouldn't be in probation for carrying a legal handgun on the street. Thank you.
Teresa, Deni, ballot position 58. I'll tell you what the answer is not. The answer is not stop and frisk. If we want people to feel powerful, they can't be stopped on the whim of a police officer who maybe hasn't had any activity in a little while and just going to stop the first person they see. This is what makes people feel very angry, very defensive, like they need protection. So I spoke with a reporter, a journalist earlier named Abraham Gutman, I think his last name was. And he was quoting me some dates and numbers, and they didn't sound right to me. I asked him, where'd you get these numbers? And it turns out that they were a couple years old. I called Commissioner Ross, and he told me there's new numbers coming out for 2016, and that people are going to be pleased about these numbers because the number of stop and frisks has decreased. They weren't really getting many guns anyway. I don't even think they were getting 2% out of that. But in the meantime, hundreds of people are being stopped. And it's not a policy that was being carried out all around the city. It only happens in certain neighborhoods. And you can guess as well as I what the basic reason for that targeting is.
It's interesting that I keep hearing this millennial did this and did this, and in no disrespect to millennials, I love you all. But millennials did all this in the DA's office. But the problem with focused deterrence, and you're talking to someone who was the first assistant and just left the DA's office, is it's systemically racist. It was applied racially. And in fact, what it is, it was applied in terms of if your friend shot someone and you were on the Facebook with your friend, then all of a sudden you had a probationary violation, you were called in. And then pressure was put on through friends. So no, it's not in terms of it was great for the district attorney's office in Philadelphia. It was racist for the district attorney's office in Philadelphia. No doubt about it. Anybody that says something different is not being honest with you. I'm not trying to win a popularity contest. I'm trying to be honest with you. It can work, but it won't work the way that it is. You notice that it was only in South Philadelphia. You know why it was there. I hear people talking about gun violence task force and we need to work with the federal government. Well, it is working with the federal government. And in fact, you attacked the gun stores. And you attacked the gun stores that clearly know that this 105-pound young lady is not there to buy a Uzi for herself when a 250-pound muscle-bound man is standing next to her. It's a straw purchase. And if in fact you participate in that, then the gun seller should be in trouble. And zero tolerance, it sounds like a mandatory minimum, which sounds like a prescription for over-incarceration, mass incarceration, and putting people in jail. There are reasons people do things. We need to individually look at this and make decisions based on intelligence, common sense, reform.
Sir, I fully support your right to carry arms, to bear arms. It's an important constitutional right, period. But we are in a gun violence crisis, and I do agree with Mr. Shabazz with sentencing people with gun things. Every individual is different. Everybody needs to be looked at. What are your circumstances? And I think one of the possibilities is actually, now I've done this in the past when I was in the DA's office as chief of the Public Nuisance Task Force, is you can file a common law nuisance injunctive action, and that's the type of solution that might be used or could be used against problematic gun stores who are really creating public risk, not following their regulations. We also have to explore, and I'm sure been part of that unit with the gun violence task force, besides the gun stores, where are they coming in? Are they being shipped in from another state? Where is there a source? Also, and find out things within the community, with interaction with the community. I know that there's been bars in the past where you can go in and rent a gun. Well, there's a lot of things you could do to shut down that establishment, and that includes working with the community, building community's trust to get that type of information. Is there somebody who's renting guns out of his house? Because that does happen. So it's an important thing to look at, but figure out where the supplies are coming from, an individual, from a residence, from a bar, or a poor gun shop.
And so as we're having our conversation in this hall, we have a robust conversation happening as well on social media. So this next question comes from Twitter, and it is as follows. As the election in the 197th district is being investigated, what concrete steps will #DAforPHL candidates take to ensure election integrity? And just by way of reference, this particular question has had over 25 likes, the most liked question on the social media space so far. And this begins with Larry.
Well, I think we can all agree that voter fraud is a bad thing. And if the evidence is truly there, then it's something that should be vigorously prosecuted. Anything that is a threat to democracy, for example, our current president, we should all look at closely. Or, for example, our current federal attorney general, Jeff Sessions, or, for example, his meeting with the head of the Fraternal Order of Police in the White House a few days before the federal government decides to abrogate every agreement between the DOJ and local law enforcement in Ferguson, in Baltimore, in Newark, in New Orleans. We have to look out for things that are, in fact, threats to democracy. Having said that, there's a very long tradition here. Being 56 years old, I remember quite a bit of this, of similar allegations in the same section of the city. And sometimes they have substance, and sometimes they don't. And anyone who's running for district attorney who tries to tell you what they're going to do after they're in office is, frankly, not fit to be district attorney, because the whole point is that you're going to be even-handed and fair to civilians and police alike, even-handed and fair regardless of class or race or gender or sexual orientation or anything else. So it would be wrong to prejudge what's going to happen. But do I consider voter fraud to be serious? Absolutely. I consider it to be incredibly serious.
Great question. It's not just about voter fraud, I think, and I think Larry's right, and we're in total agreement for the first time, I think, in a long time. It's also about the integrity and voter intimidation. I think the DAs plays an incredibly important role. For those of you who don't know, DAs, young DAs, are on election duty every election here in Philadelphia. Some DAs are trained, and then they sit by and they answer those responses. During my time on the Committee of 70, I know I partnered with many of those DAs during election duty to make sure that we responded to complaints. There are issues not just around voter intimidation, but whether it's wrongly enforcing voter ID laws that aren't constitutional and are not on the books, and doing that in manners that are offensive and violate people's probably the most important constitutional right, their right to vote. That happens across the city. You don't have to guess about what you're going to do or talk about what you're going to do. It is your job as an assistant district attorney and as the DA to ensure the integrity of what's going on election day. You have a specific role to do that. You should. We need to make sure that our elections are not tampered with, that there's not just fraud, but intimidation that happens across. And we've all known that there's those abuses that can occur and that occur on a regular basis, especially during major presidential elections. And the DA plays an important role there. I'll make sure that we do everything we can and that my assistant DAs do everything we can to ensure the integrity of that election process.
The way the DA's office currently investigates and prosecutes election fraud is there is, on election day, people who are pulled and put onto mobile election investigation units. I've been on that unit. Probably all the other DAs in here have been in that unit. And then there are 2 attorneys who are actually in the election fraud unit who are supposed to take what was learned and see if any charges need to be brought. Those 2 attorneys are fantastic lawyers, but they also have a lot of other jobs. One is the assistant chief of the special investigations unit, and one works on financial fraud schemes. So they're split all over the place. Obviously, what you need is a dedicated unit with people who can focus on what those investigations reveal when they reveal acts of voter fraud. You also need something that removes the politics from it more effectively. What you need to do is what's done in a lot of other cities where you cross-designate. In other words, you get a U.S. attorney who's not from Philadelphia, and you have them work on the election fraud unit as well, so that they, no matter where they go in their career or what they do, will never feel the pressure of making a powerful politician happy. That's the way that we should better address election fraud in Philadelphia.
Voter fraud is something that's simply unacceptable. I think we have to train our assistant district attorneys, first of all, so on election day, all those that are assigned to that work know what they're doing. And when it comes time to investigating, prosecuting these cases, again, we have to have the lawyers that have the training and expertise to do it. In addition, I think we should work with the Attorney General's office in many cases where we don't have the expertise or where there's a problem with possible fairness in prosecuting these cases.
Teresa Deni, ballot position 58. I have to go back again into my misspent youth and tell you that there was a time when I served as a poll watcher for a friend of mine who apparently provided me with a poll watcher certificate under the Constitution Party. Now, while I was watching what was going on, I was jotting a few notes in my diary, and I think the people in the polls thought that I was writing down stuff about them. But the next thing I knew, 2 burly men came into the polling place and said that leave or be arrested. And I, being a smart person, I left. The person with the Communist Party watcher certificate did not leave, and she was arrested. But anyway, I almost lost my faith in the election system during that experience, but I kept track of it, and I noticed that within a couple years, the people who were responsible for that were held accountable in criminal court. So I believe that sometimes the system appears to be working slowly, but in many cases, it does work. My parents were committee people, and I don't think it helped in this last election, this specific election that we're talking about, that the Commonwealth Court judge refused to allow Democratic poll watchers to be in the polling place. That is a setup for accusations and misconduct, if possibly. And or misconduct.
You finished?
Yes.
It is amazing that people talk a lot about what happens in the district attorney's office when they weren't in there during the last election. It wasn't 2 people that prosecute the cases. There were more than 2 people. It wasn't just individuals that came there. There were people that were actually trained. We had training sessions. It wasn't that individuals didn't take complaints because we had rovers. We had people on the phone. We had people that went out for particular complaints. We had people that filed the complaints. And we had individuals, not 2, more than 2 assistant district attorneys that evaluated every particular complaint and whether that complaint was enough to take forward to a grand jury to the end of it. So there's so many people that talk so much about things they don't have any idea about. Does it need to be improved? Everything can be improved. And if it is improved, again, with diversity, dignity, decisiveness, integrity, and transparency, people will begin to believe again in this system. There are a lot of things we can tell you about. I can tell you about this first time I ran for office. I can tell you a lot of things about the election and some of the things that people are talking about ethics here that people are doing here. But we're not going to have that discussion today.
Well, Beth Grossman, lone Republican candidate, number 1 on the ballot. That being said, I do commend Attorney General Josh Shapiro for looking into this investigation in the 197 special election. But throughout this evening, when we talk about how can we better sentence people or decarcerate, we talk about going to, well, what is the cause? What is the root of the problem? And what I will tell you is the root of the problem that we have here for so many issues on Election Day is the accepted corrupt behavior of our one-party system in Philadelphia, the Democratic Party. It gets to the point where it is just accepted. This is the way. This is the Philadelphia way, and it cannot be. It is not fair. It is not fair to people who are intimidated when they go into the polling place because they want to vote for a different party. It is not fair to the Republican Party, to the independents, to libertarians, to whoever else. There is such a stronghold with this cancer that allows this to go on. I went and watched in a polling place this past presidential election, and I cannot tell you what I saw from the minute I got there to several hours later of people on the Democratic side going in and pointing and telling people how to vote. So as the DA, I will make sure these offenses are prosecuted properly and thoroughly, regardless of what party is committing the misconduct.
So, Joe Kahn, number 54. I agree with so much about what's been said, so let me focus on where I disagree. Jack makes a good point about having independent review, but I fundamentally disagree with the idea of bringing someone from the federal government to get involved in election monitoring. That would, in this day and age, would require trusting whatever lawyer that Donald Trump decides to plant in our district as our next U.S. attorney to put them in charge of decisions about how our elections are run and who's going to get prosecuted and who's not. I think there are other ways to achieve independent review by working with other DA's offices or the Attorney General. And I fundamentally disagree with my friend Beth about the solution to dealing with the corruption in the Democratic Party. Look, I'm running because I want Philadelphia to have a dynamic and progressive district attorney's office that provides access to justice for all in Philadelphia, and I step forward to do that. But I also hope that in addition to becoming that DA, that in doing so, that I can inspire more people to do what I did. Because when I decided that I couldn't go on seeing 4 more years of the current DA, Seth Williams, doing to our city what he has done for the last 7, that I couldn't look at my kids in the eyes and explain to them why I didn't do anything, people told me, you have no chance, you can't run against the system, you can't fix the party. I rejected that. And as a result of being willing to step forward, we are now in a position where we have put together the best operation. We have the most number of donors. We received the endorsement of Ed Rendell, not because I worked with him like people here on the stage have, but because he recognized it was time for new leadership in this city. And I hope that after I win, many of you in this audience decide to step forward and get involved in the process and save our party and save our city.
Thank you very much. Our next question is going to come from Mike Blackwell.
All right, thank everybody for coming. My question is about marijuana. What's your views on the legalization and decriminalization of marijuana? And as a follow-up question, you know, when I know it's going to be legalized, you know, it says to me that maybe it was always legal. Now it becomes profitable. So what about the people that's in prison already for that which is going to be legal? Thanks.
is to you, Rich.
That's for me. Boy, I'm gonna be consistent with this answer the way I've answered this before. As a district attorney, I absolutely believe in the decriminalization and recreational use of marijuana. My son's in the room. As a dad, absolutely not. Just so that's clear. Look, I think that's the easy answer. I think you're going to get that answer from everybody up here, consistent with what I've heard in the other debates. I think the second part of your question is incredibly hard. I think we have to look at those cases and make decisions, I think, and there needs to be, a just outcome. I think there's a review process for many of those things, whether it's post-conviction review or, some process where we have conversations. If we go all the way and legalize marijuana, I think to have folks sitting in jail, especially for significant periods of time on the basis of marijuana convictions, really rings unjust to me. So, I think you've got to look at those things on a case-by-case basis. Much tougher question, but I'm open to that conversation, and I think it matters and it makes common sense. So, Connor, wherever you are, no to marijuana, just so that's clear. Thanks.
It's a great question. Under my administration, we would decriminalize marijuana. It's already taken big steps in that you get approximately 4 hours community service for having a small amount of marijuana on you. That 4 hours of community service and the resources it takes to take that person into court are a waste of time. And there are legitimate medical reasons for marijuana. There are people who have seizure disorders who truly benefit from the use of marijuana. And quite frankly, as all of you know, you don't really see violence occurring for people who use marijuana. It's less dangerous than alcohol, frankly. So wasting resources on arresting and prosecuting people for smoking marijuana doesn't make any sense. And under my administration, that wouldn't happen. Just as important as your question, and it focuses on something that's already been done in California, which is going back and looking at people who are nonviolent and who have been very good, upstanding prisoners in prison, but who are there for marijuana convictions. Releasing them as well makes sense. At this point, if a drug is legal, and if over the last 20 years we've learned that it doesn't cause people to be violent, and that it has medical benefits, seeing someone sitting in Gradeford because of some enormous sentence that they received for selling marijuana doesn't make any sense.
First, I agree that marijuana should be decriminalized. And beyond that, as district attorney, I would certainly not object to the legalization of recreational use of marijuana. First of all, the city could use all the tax revenues that would come in from the sales of legal marijuana. So that's my position on marijuana. In terms of people that have been prosecuted and are in jail for the sale of marijuana, if it's, again, low level or low amounts of marijuana, I think we should look at those convictions and see what we can do to release those people.
Teresa, Deni, ballot number 58. You can legally drink alcohol, but that doesn't mean you can walk down the street and drink alcohol. So I have no problem with marijuana being legalized, but I don't think it should be consumed on the street. As a mother of an 18-year-old and a 12-year-old, I don't want them to see this as normal behavior. This is a personal choice. Some people drink alcohol, some people smoke pot, some people do other things. But I don't think that it should be accepted in the public, and I would... Now, but that being said, the way it's being handled right now is smoking in public, you get a $25 citation. Whereas if you are drinking alcohol in public or open container, you get a citation where the maximum fine is $300 and the court costs alone are something like $180. So it's a disproportionate punishment for these kind of violations. And I think that either one should be lowered or the other one should be raised. But I think they should be handled equally, and I don't think it should be encouraged in public.
I don't think we can play with this. Either you believe that it should be legalized and it should be legalized for recreational use as well as medical health. It's legalized, or you believe that it shouldn't. For someone to argue, and I love Judge Deni, but for someone to say that you can't smoke marijuana in the street, but people have beer in the street sitting down on their corner, or people are smoking cigarettes in the street, or something else that may be harmful or people see as harmful, I think is disingenuous in terms of what we're talking about. We're talking about something that all of us, I think, agrees that we're not going to seek arresting people and convicting people for. Now, I'm talking about possessory marijuana. If you come in and you have 3 or 4 pounds of marijuana, I don't know, depending on what the law says, what happens with respect to that. I think regulations are regulations. I think that what we've done is we've created a system where we are imprisoning people for something that is not as bad, and I would agree with you, as alcohol, unless you get high and then you drive a car, then it is just as bad. So I think that my position is I have no objection to it being legalized. I have no objection to looking at the effects of it, and I have no objection to not, in fact, incarcerating people or applying that particular law if, in fact, I find it to be against what we're doing publicly.
I have no problem with legalizing it. You know, it would lessen the burden of an overcrowded court system. It would lessen the burden of having people for probation violations or being held on detainers. You know, I think it does bear looking at, you know, for a while I was chief of our dangerous drug offender unit, and when we'd see our police personnel pushing in a cart full of 100 pounds of weed, you know, that's one thing to look at. Or the fact that when there is a large-scale grow operation, because several years ago we lost 2 firefighters responding to that. So it's kind of a balance that bears looking at. You sort of have to look at, I know if we have dispensaries that are regulated, that's fine. But those who are using it and getting into a car, or those that are having, you know, ridiculous setup grow operations with bulbs and lights that are creating a public hazard to neighbors, first responders, infrastructure, you know, you can't neglect those, and they need to be considered as well. But for the day-to-day, the smoking of marijuana, no, I think we need to just get it out of our court system for now.
Joe Kahn, number 54. Thank you for your question. And we're talking about my opinion. Yes, I think the legislature should step up and legalize recreational use of marijuana appropriately, something they haven't done. I'm running for district attorney, and I can promise you in terms of what I can do, not what other agencies can do or will do. And what I can tell you in terms of what the district attorney's office will do is we are going to stop prosecuting low-level drug offenses, period, that criminalize addiction, okay? Whether we're talking about marijuana or we're talking about other drugs where people are suffering from addiction, from heroin, from crack cocaine, we need to recognize that with those drugs, we are dealing with a public health crisis, and we need solutions that aren't going to be solved by diverting resources that could be put into treatment into arrests and prosecutions. And I think one of the reasons that it's important for us to recognize the role of a district attorney's office in this is that the DA needs to have a vision for how we're going to deal with this, because while we shouldn't criminalize addiction and for people who are suffering like my grandfather did with addiction, we need to be taking on the bigger fight. Right now, there's a sense of satisfaction that we lock up a couple drug dealers and we're doing our part in the war on drugs. Now, I don't know about you, but I don't think that the DA's office is winning any war on drugs, and I think that there is a fundamental question of fairness. You have doctors and healthcare providers who are contributing to the opioid abuse crisis that we have by illegally running pill mills, illegally overprescribing medications, but no one is taking on the big fights and going after those guys. Those are the kind of fights I want to see our DA's office taking on. They're the kind of fights we took on at the U.S. Attorney's Office, and I'm ready to do that as your DA.
There are 100 good reasons to legalize recreational and medical use of marijuana, but I'm just going to give you 4. Number 1, 500 people died from opioid overdose last year in Philadelphia. Twice as many people as died from homicide. Studies show that where marijuana is readily available, you can reduce that 25%. So would you like to save 125 lives next year? Because I would. Reason number 2, in Colorado, where it is readily available, they've determined that the juvenile use of marijuana, and I don't support juvenile use any more than juvenile use of cigarettes or alcohol, juvenile use decreased when it's readily available, which I think means it's not fun anymore. It's amazing, but it's the truth. Reason number 3, the reason we have firefighters who died in that warehouse is because it's illegal. If it was legal, then you wouldn't have a bunch of extension cords and people hiding out from law enforcement. This is why you legalize things like this, so you can avoid that, okay? And number 4, Colorado is swimming in money for education. The only states that are going to get all of that money, it's going to be like gambling all over again. We'll be the first ones to get in there. So in the poorest of the 10 largest cities in the United States, in a city with, frankly, dismal public school performance, despite all the wonderful teachers who basically kill themselves to try to do a great job, we can use those tax funds. So I have taken that position from the beginning. I'm glad to see it's been so persuasive, and I totally support it.
So, believe it or not, we've reached the last question of the evening. And for that last question, we have Daniel Pearson.
On TV, Philadelphia is the setting for the hit show How to Get Away with Murder. Sadly, it seemed that they chose the right place because most killers in Philadelphia do actually get away with it. Less than 50% of murders in the city are actually solved as of right now, let alone successfully prosecuted. Personally, one of my friends, neighbors, and middle school classmates, Erica Brer, was murdered in 2007, and we have yet to find out who committed this murder. She's one of the thousands of victims in Philadelphia whose killers are unknown and still walking our streets. As district attorney, how do you intend to make sure less people get away with murder and more people get justice for their loved ones?
This begins with Jack.
It's a great question. It's one of the most important questions in this campaign. There are a few major solutions that we have to have, and we have to have them now. The first I talked about is all of the illegal guns in our city, which we have a three-part way of fixing, one of which is focused deterrence. The next part is illegal, dangerous gun shows and gun shops. And the last is supporting City Hall's legislation to regulate guns more. The next thing we need to do is address the homicides that are committed in domestic violence situations. There are approximately 3 domestic violence murders a year. All of those people, almost 100% every year, have had contact as survivors of domestic violence with the criminal justice system before they get murdered. They've asked for help, and it hasn't been there for them. And what we need to do is be much better about assigning a prosecutor to a person who comes forward as a survivor of domestic violence on day one and making sure that prosecutor is there for that person, not just for that case, but for every case afterward. I tried to do that with our protection from abuse order courtroom that we had. We had a system where it worked for a while, and then the person who ran it left, and we no longer have that. It needs to be re-implemented and expanded and made much more aggressive. The last thing is the DA's office has to be so much better, and this can be done partially through focused deterrence, at reaching out to witnesses and letting them know that we will make sure in every way we can that we represent them, that they're safe, and that we stand for everything that they want us to stand for. In other words, that we will make sure that we are there for their community after the homicide happens and the streets are cleaned up and the conviction does or does not happen. I see people here today from families of murder victims. These are amazing people who have helped families well after murders, well after convictions, to be safe. We need to do a much better job of that so the city knows that we have their back and that we're there for people who are witnesses and victims of these horrible crimes.
Your first question is about the number of murders that are uncleared in Philadelphia. I think the problem is the community, individuals that observe homicides are afraid to come forward. I think we have to provide more support for them. I think whenever there's a homicide in the city, a DA should be assigned right when the homicide takes place to work with the police and to work with the community to find out who's responsible for it. That's the first thing we can do, I think, to lower the clearance rate. Secondly, I think when we take these cases, homicide cases, we have to move as fast as possible to get them to the point where they're tried. So there's less opportunity and less time for witnesses to be intimidated.
Teresa, Deni, ballot number 58. One of the reasons that there are so many unsolved homicides is poor police-community relations. Last night I was at the Somerton Civic Association. There were over 100 people there. The police were describing the new police cameras that are about to be put into place. And people there are not afraid of the police or talking to the police. However, when you're in these stop and frisk neighborhoods, they're not just afraid of the police, they're angry with the police. They're not going to help the police. If we have these types of these community organizations in every neighborhood in Philadelphia where we can start improving the police-community relations, people, they used to say, oh, I heard on the street. I mean, you can get the on-the-street information directly to the police. You do not then drive up to that person's house in a police car and let the entire neighborhood know that they're the source of the information for who's being arrested. You have to use some discretion and common sense. People are afraid, and they are rightfully afraid. But They know who did most of these crimes. And if they think they're going to be protected, they'll help. They'll help solve the problem.
I think stop and frisk neighborhood is a code word for Black and Hispanic neighborhood or poor economic neighborhoods, because that's where the stop and frisk happens. So if we can be clear, it all begins with community involvement. There's no doubt about it. But if you're going to expect someone to come forward, they have to trust you. They have to trust that you're going to take that information and keep it confidential for as long as you can before you have to turn it over pursuant to discovery rules. They have to trust that when you tell them that you will protect them, that doesn't mean that once they get off the stand that they go home by a token that you give them. They got to trust that, in fact, if in fact one day they believe they can't come to court, that you don't lock them up and treat them as if they did something wrong when they are an eyewitness. That's the relationship, and those are the things that have to be changed with respect to solving homicides. You can't ask someone to participate in solving a homicide if they're a civilian, but when there's a police officer that's engaged in illegal police conduct where he hurts or he kills another individual, his partner or her partner doesn't come forward and say, yes, they did something wrong. If there's stop snitching or stop the snitching rule with respect to the community, then it has to be one with respect to law enforcement. A trust has to go both ways. Both individuals have to feel that they have something to gain and something to lose, that they want to protect their community. And of course, you have to have diversity. You can't send someone to a community to have a conversation with them if they don't understand the person that they're having a conversation with. They don't have any empathy towards that individual or any understanding of how to communicate.
I agree with Mr. El-Shabazz. It's only going to increase reporting of information of homicides if there is community trust, where members of the community know that they will feel safe coming forward to give information that, again, that will be kept confidential for as long as possible. Not that they are going to be dragged down to 8th and Race and being held for several days. That just doesn't work. It cannot work. For several years, I ran the Public Nuisance Task Force unit that dealt with drug houses and drug businesses, and we had a hotline. People are terrified to even leave their names to report a drug house. So I can't even imagine the absolute fear that folks have wanting to get involved with a homicide. It's got to be terrifying. It's the same neighborhood. You know, they might know the doer might know them, know where they live. It's a frightening thing, and we have an obligation to step up and protect those people. And part of that is also with drug forfeiture money. The statute actually allows that money to be utilized for relocation in cases, especially in homicide. So that's something that go forward. Now, not everybody is going to want to leave their home, leave their neighborhood, leave what they know. But for those people who step up and will consider it, we need to be there for them to provide that net, because this is a big sacrifice for people to step up and do the right thing in the ultimate crime. And also, as far as the unsolved cases, years ago, I know that there had been a grant where a prosecutor was assigned to look through unsolved cases with detectives, and I think that's something we should look into again.
Great. Joe Kahn, 54. Thanks so much for your question. I'm really sorry to hear about your loss. I can answer this question in part because as a federal prosecutor, I did solve homicides by working collaboratively with federal agents and people that we had charged in order to solve these cases. I talked a little bit earlier about how we weren't satisfied just getting a conviction in these cases where we scooped up dangerous people and got them off the street and prosecuted them with federal gun laws, but we made sure that we tried to get them to cooperate to root out the gun traffickers. The gold standard for cooperation, for getting leniency, was when people could help us solve homicides. And we solved homicides, particularly in Southwest Philadelphia, by not just being satisfied with the easy, quick conviction, but by being more bold and dynamic and thoughtful and comprehensive and work and seeing it in our interest, in the city's interest, to try and solve those cases. The other thing, and I agree with my colleagues about this, is improving relations between the community and the police is critical. And it's why it's so important when we think about who is most at risk in Philadelphia. You know, as many of you know, in particular, if you are a transgender woman of color, you are thousands of times more likely to be the victim of a homicide than anyone in America. And one of the reasons for that is because so many communities suffer in silence. They are afraid to speak up. They are afraid that if they talk to the police, they will not be treated with dignity and respect. And that's one of the reasons that the police can't find people to talk to them, the people who know who committed the murder. And that's one of the things that I committed to as an assistant district attorney, and it's what I'll be committed to as your DA.
So there's a little picture and there's a big picture. I agree with a lot of what's said on the little picture. And I would say this, because I've been in court 4 to 5 days a week for 30 years, I have close relationships with homicide detectives. We don't have enough. It isn't that expensive to have more. If you get rid of a third of the $300 million expense up on State Road to keep all those people in jail, you got $100 million. It only takes about $1 million to have a whole bunch more homicide detectives. You also have a ridiculously small amount of forensic teams who can go out there and do DNA and do proper fingerprints and things of that sort. That's ridiculous. I mean, it doesn't take that much money. So if we stop spending money on stupid, we're going to have it for smart, okay? But here's the big picture. You've already failed when there's a homicide. You have already failed. We have to think in terms of a prevention model like they do with medicine. Once the blood is on the ground, you have failed. And like it or not, this whole thing about how the DA is going to fix the problem hasn't worked. It hasn't worked in Philadelphia. It hasn't worked anywhere. Yes, these are good things to do, but this is the last resort. What you have to do is you have to actually heal society. You have to actually give 16-year-olds a reason not to pick up the guns that are more plentiful than people and shoot each other and become parts of gangs because they see no hope, because they've dropped out of school, because there are no jobs, because they have no job training, because their families have been broken up by family members who are put in jail for 2 years at a time, and then they get out and then they go back and they can't get a job because they have convictions they never needed to have. You have to heal society before you're going to actually deal with homicides from a prevention model.
So I want to step back a moment and just be human. I'm really sorry for your loss. This is not a policy-based conversation, some sanitary conversation around approach. I've lived this issue, and I know what it's like to lose someone personally to gun violence suddenly. There's nothing worse. I can tell you we need a district attorney who's going to be a champion for those families. We need a district attorney who's going to work hard, stand alongside, like I have, with Mothers in Charge. And Dorothy Johnson Spates, stand alongside Alieta Garcia from the National Center for Homicide Victims. I've done that. We need someone who's going to be serious about supporting and protecting our families and being there to make sure they get the justice that they deserve and does it the right way. We burn through the fund right now. We need all your help to make sure that City Council allocates more funds to support victims of crime, especially homicide victims. That they're all saying the right thing around trust, right? It starts with trust. Larry's right. It starts with preventing homicides to begin with. That's what we're talking about. I'm talking about creating opportunity and empowering our kids. That matters. But I got to tell you, we need a district attorney who has spent a lifetime, like I have, making a difference for our victims on this specific issue. We had a block party that had a shooting where a 4-year-old was shot just a few years ago. 200 people there. Not one witness came forward. There was no trust in that community. We need to start working on that today, and that takes all of us. I'm going to be the DA to make that happen.
Thank you again so much for your participation in the forum this evening. We wanted to give all the candidates an opportunity to make a closing remark before we end tonight's dialogue. We are getting close to the 8 o'clock hour, so I'm going to ask if all the candidates keep their remarks to 1:30 in the closing statement, and we're going to begin. Excuse me? I'm sorry, I'm getting a message here. So, Michael, we're going to begin with you for your closing statement.
Thank you. My name is Michael Untermeyer, Democratic candidate for district attorney. Our system is not working today. We have to reject the status quo. We need a district attorney that's going to reform the system. And the reforms I want to do include our bail system, which is based on money. It shouldn't be based on money. Civil forfeiture, we haven't talked about that tonight. Our civil forfeiture system is really ripe for abuse. We need to change that. We need to take the funds that come in from civil forfeiture and return those funds to the community. We can't take homes and property for people who have never been convicted of a crime. Conviction integrity, we've talked about that. We need a robust and meaningful unit that looks at bad convictions. We need a district attorney that's willing to take this on. I simply believe I have the ideas, the experience, and the integrity, and most importantly, the independence to come to this office and make the changes that we fundamentally need to make. I love this city, and I believe, as district attorney, I'll make the changes that I've talked about tonight.
you hear me? Looks like my mic has died, but we're going to jump out of wherever one of the candidates has to head out. So Joe, Con, if you could.
Thank you so much for having us here tonight. So much has been said, and I think these were really fantastic questions that everyone asked. The reason I am so moved, and the reason that I decided to step forward and seek your vote as district attorney is because Philadelphia needs a progressive prosecutor who is a champion for everyone in the city. We need to think about what we wanted in a DA. What can we do with the power of that office to make society better? Now, there are so many things that I think many of us agree on, and when we talk about communities in Philadelphia that feel afraid to step forward to report crime, people who suffer in silence. We are talking about those who do not have access to justice, right? It's easy to look at statistics when police officers make arrests and cases come through the system, but so many of the cases where I was privileged to champion victims of sexual assault, child abuse, domestic violence, elder abuse, hate crimes, what I couldn't do was I couldn't reach the people who never stepped forward. And what I want to make sure we do with our DA's office is to ask those questions. Who is not being served? Who is the victim of consumer fraud? Who is the victim of human trafficking? Who are the communities that can't step forward? It's important that we all agree that Philadelphia has to be a sanctuary city for immigrants, not just because it's the right thing to do, because if we want to keep the city safe, we need to make sure that people don't fear the police, that people know that if they step forward and they report crime or they talk about their experience, that they will not be punished, their families will not be torn apart, but that they will have a protector and a champion in their district attorney. That's why I'm running for DA. My name is Joe Con. I'm number 54. Please vote for Joe Con. Thank you.
The reason that I'm the most qualified candidate in this election is because I have the most experience as a Philadelphia prosecutor. I was at the DA's office for the last 10 years as a prosecutor. There's only one other person running in the Democratic election that will be May 16th who had stepped foot into the DA's office in the last 10 years, and that's Tariq El-Shabazz. He was there for 6.5 months. I was there for a decade. And if we're going to be real, he was there for 6.5 months so that Seth Williams could tell us who our next DA was going to be. I was there implementing reforms. I was there protecting victims. I have more experience as a homicide prosecutor than everyone else who's running combined. And that message has started to get out. And we've started to gain incredible momentum. And I now have endorsements that are the most important endorsements in this city. And I have people backing me that are the most important supporters in this city. And I have amazing support from many of you. And now what's happened is people have started to play some politics. And they've started to call and say, he may have the most experience, but he's not ready because he's too young. We are ready. We are the ones who have implemented the reforms. We are the ones who have changed this city and invested in this city. We are the people who can make Philadelphia the city we know it can be. My name's Jack O'Neill. I'm running for district attorney, and I ask you from the bottom of my heart to support me and vote for me on May 16th.
My name is Rich Negrin. I'm running for district attorney, and you heard tonight a lot of the reasons why. This is not about what's next for me. I've had big jobs before. This is not about what I can get. This is about what I can give. There's a reason why President Barack Obama named me a White House champion of change for programs that I've already run. You don't have to believe what I'm going to say. You can look at a proven record of accomplishment, whether it's Philly Rising, implementing Philly 311 in our mobile app, Philly Key Spots, making sure that our young people have access to be online in our digital deserts. Whether it's my innovation agenda, many of you in the room helped launch the first municipal innovation lab in the country here in Philadelphia. I'm proud of that. Those are records of achievement and things that I've done. This isn't just about integrity and driving integrity through an organization. I was on the Philadelphia Board of Ethics, what Dave Davies called the most progressive and aggressive pay-to-play law in the entire country. So I haven't just been a good person. I've driven ethics reform through an office that is in trouble. Guys, the DA's office is a management job. It needs a real professional, thoughtful, experienced manager who's gotten things done and who's touched every single one of our communities in this city. I've done that through those organizations. I'm going to do it again. Those reasons are why the Hispanic National Bar Association named me Latino Lawyer of the Year, because of what I drove on diversity in those programs that help make a difference in these communities. That is the time. We need your help to do that. May 16th, number 1 on the ballot on the DA side, number 53, Rich Negrin. Please vote for me for District Attorney.
So Larry Krasner, number 57. You know, words are nice, and as it happens, I seem to be sitting up here with a whole crew of reformers. They have all been in government. They have all been in the district attorney's office, and we have yet to see the fruit of all this reform. But it turns out that they're all reformers. Like I said, words are nice. Go to my website, krasner4da.com. Look at the facts. See whether what you're hearing is a bunch of campaign promises or is matched by a history of actual reform. Are these reformers, in fact, endorsed by the Fraternal Order of Police? Are they? Are these reformers who claim to have done all these things in their offices as prosecutors, are they able to show you something that actually confirms all this reform occurred? Everyone sits up here and says it's terrible, and everyone who is sitting up here, frankly, has been a part of the problem, except me. Throughout my career, I have represented reformers time and time again. They have brought about remarkable changes, and I did it because it's in my heart and because it's what I believe. The only reason that I want to be in this office is to bring fundamental transformation to the office. It has been going the wrong direction for 30 years and frankly has been going that direction while my fellow candidates were in it one way or another. It's one thing to say, I was starting to change this, I'm going to change that, but let's get real. Look at my record. Don't trust me. Just look at my record and also look at this. As long as we're talking about support, Philly Reclaim endorsed me. Philly for Change endorsed me. 1199C, a predominantly African-American union, endorsed me. Michael Cord endorsed me. Look at the people and organizations who are supporting my candidacy, because words are nice, but I gave it to you straight. I told you the truth, and if you do the research, you will see that. Thank you.
I am proud to be running as a Republican in Philadelphia. A Republican in Philadelphia is not an easy lift, let me tell you. And I am proud of all of you for being here, no matter what your party is, and I expect great things from you. And what is clear is that Philadelphia needs more political balance. I can go in, and the most important thing is when you're a public servant, you serve the public. It's not that hard. And I can pledge that I will be able to prosecute public official corruption without any obligation to any political machine or party, because public officials need to be held to the highest standard to ensure that they are serving the public, of which you are a part of. I am proud of my 21 and a half years in office, Mr. Krasner. So I know you said you worked for 30 years, but after 30 years now you're finally stepping up. So that needs to be considered as well. I served in every division of the unit, of the office. I know how it works. I have run units. I served for 1 year as chief of staff in the Department of Licenses and Inspections. I never wanted to go and be in private practice. I took my oath of office seriously. It is an honor and it is a privilege, and I look forward to earning your vote come November. And for those Republicans, get out there and vote for me on May 16th. Thank you.
I was wondering when Jack was going to try to pivot and all of a sudden tried to point me with Seth and make us like we're joined at the hip. But the interesting thing about it is that he's been 3 years in the homicide unit, and if he dreams that he's tried more homicide cases or have more experience in trying cases than me, he should wake up and apologize. The reality of the situation is this. The 6-month time that I spent running that office, that 600-man office, you look at those statistics, and I agree with Mr. Krasner. Go find out what happened. Go find out what was reformed. It's always been about me being reformed because I was born this way. It's not anything new for me. So when anyone tells you that they can only do it and they can do it because they spent 10 years, I want you to think about the 10 years in the Similac that's still on his lip in terms of litigation. But what I want you to think about is who's going to be transformative. I want you to think about who who really has the litigation experience. I want you to think about who's going to be balanced. I want you to think about who understands what the community needs. See, if you want to get in the mud, I know Michelle said go high, but I'm going to get in the mud with you. So if we want to start to talk facts, we're going to start calling you out on some of the lies that you told these individuals here today and you've told in other ones. I'm going to ask you to get every form, and I want you to look at every form that we participate in, and I want you to see who's remained consistent throughout the form with their particular position and who's changed their position. And if you begin to do that, you're going to see who is live and who is Memorex. 56, Tariq El-Shabazz, number one in your heart.
Thank you. Teresa, Deni, number 58. I told you earlier how I came to change direction from the international scene to the local scene, and I believe that my career reflects that change of heart. When I was serving as a criminal defense attorney and also when I was serving as a judge, it was one individual at a time, one case at a time, one set of facts, and each decision that was made. I think that the district attorney's office is more a policy situation than it is a managerial. I hate to say, but you can, but managers make a series of decisions. I've been making series of decisions every day on the bench for the past 21 years. I think for the most part, not that I'm a perfect judge, but my decisions can be trusted, and I think that I have a good reputation for it. So I believe that it's more important to deal with the policy of the office. For starters, when I first get into the office, I am going to look at the inequities between how whites and minorities are paid, how whites and minorities are graduated into higher terms. The second thing I want to do is I want to hire more people with multilingual skills. The city is becoming more diverse, and we need people that understand these different communities so that immigrants and other people in minority communities can feel that they can talk to somebody who understands them, so that everybody gets some kind of representation in the DA's office in Philadelphia. Teresa, Deni, number 58. Thanks very much for having us here.
Let's give all the candidates one more round of applause. Thank you all for participating in this event, and thank you all for attending. Politics is not possible without discourse and dialogue, and we hope tonight's discourse and dialogue was informative and will help you make your decision about who you want to be the next Philadelphia DA. Join us in Fox and the Hound for some drinks and some more conversation, and thank you again to the candidates.